The first paper is from Yasser Sayed and Rafael Makuria, Robust Study 35 in OTT Workflow. Tag team, right?
Okay, welcome everybody to the last session, and I guess we're both heading this up. So the title of our talk today is Robust SCT 35 in the OTT Workflow. So just to give an introduction, this is actually kind of a special type of paper. I'm representing, I'm from Comcast, but I'm representing SCTE. In terms of, I'm the Working Group 7 chair. And then Rafael is from Unified Streaming, but he's also representing DVB as the lead TM Stream Working Group chair in DVB. And one of the reasons this paper got together is that both organizations have been getting together to kind of work on some of these problems. So today we're trying to give a brief overview on this. But just to remember, we can only give a brief overview. There's actually a paper attached to this, so please look at the paper for a lot more details. So what I'm going to do is try to give a level set, because when you're tackling this SCT 35 to advertising in Dash and HLS problem, there's people coming in from multiple angles. So you have people who are familiar with SCT 35 and a transport stream and a PID that comes in, but you also have people who are dealing with this as, hey, I have a manifest and I'm grabbing content segments and pulling in either the main content or the advertising. So what I'm trying to do in a basis is set the level set on this. So the first one is the SCT 35 call flow. So you can have two parts to this. One is either coming in from the server side or the network side, in which case you'd have the signal coming in from the encoder with the SCT 35 messages. It would go to a ad server, which would then call the ad decision server to know which ads it would go, and then go to the player. On the other side, you could do this all through the client itself and have the client itself talk to the ad decision server to get that, and I mean client or player. So let me show you this. The splice, so at the core of an SCT 35 message, you have a splice information section, and this is including certain commands for this where you're adding in the ads, which is called a splice insert. So you could have a linear broadcast channel where you could have a section that's a main program. Then you'd have some area that is substituted content. So this may be national ad channels in there that you're actually putting in channels, replacing the ads from that. And then it will go back to the main program. So the first red line is usually called a splice out. The second green line is usually called a splice in. And in between, you may substitute or replace your ads. There is a thing with VOD where you may insert an ad, but it's not. It's extending the timeline versus just replacing what's in the timeline. Okay, so in the SCT 35 message, it's up here, and I guess what we want to show is in the splice info section, you'd have a command which can be a splice insert command to say, hey, this is a splicing point, and that usually comes in a couple of seconds before you have that, because in a transport stream, you're tuning into the stream. So you have to make sure you have that message to know that you need to go and splice out to another point. So it would have information in there showing either duration or showing points where you need to return. And then I guess that part in red is a splice in immediate flag, which is true, which is still, I guess, under kind of not usually used, but it's something that we need to consider. So that was from transport side, but with adaptive streaming, we need to make this flip into a dash MPD, and in this case, when you have it, you're not tuning into the stream, you're looking at a manifest. and then you need to retrieve your content from there. So the thing that comes in is when you need to update the manifest and know that, hey, you have the splice conditioning here. And so what we do is with the splice 35 marker, you flip it up into an event in the event stream. So what we're showing over here is basically that was the payload that we had before, and then we're flipping it into an event with a presentation time. And then this blue thing over here is basically showing kind of the time reflected to an epoch, which Rafael will talk about a little bit more. And then the next one I'm showing is what it would look like in HLS M3U8 manifest, which would be using the extended data range over here, and then you'd have a start date, and then you'd have that payload over here, and then you'd basically queue back into the program. So you'd queue out for the ad and then queue back into the program. So one other thing I wanted to show you was it's not just advertising for SCTE35 signals. You can use this to annotate the broadcast stream to show here's a program or here's a chapter within a program as well as the advertising. So this diagram kind of shows that along with the events, it's not just an advertising event. You may have events to show this is part of the program 1 or this is part of chapter 1 of program 1. And on the adaptive streaming side, you have to align this with the creation of the segments. So what you could do is have the splice point, and if you look at it, there's kind of 3 different ways to do this, where you may have the creation of the new segment be where the splice point is. So you see those red parts in here is where the splice point is, and then on the top one is where you'd start the new segment. But you could also have it in other modes with it being in the middle of a segment. But usually what happens is it basically is a place to start a segment. So you also, at the encoder, need to know the SCT35 messages to make sure you condition the content for that. And now I will pass it off to Rafael.
Yes, so thank you, Yasser. So I'm going to talk a little bit more about DVB, which started to actually use SCTE35 in some of its recent specifications. So before continuing with that, this is not something I was prepared to talk about, but maybe it's an interesting detail for some that actually a few years ago in the standards there was actually a bit of a fight between DVB and SCT members because we interpreted the dash event message differently, and that crashed some HBB TV devices, and some people were not happy about that. But yeah, I've deviated a little bit from the topic, so but I thought maybe this is interesting background. But yeah, so DVB is working on 3 documents. So the first one is part 1 on DVB-TA, which is already completed and published in 2020. And actually there, DVB adopted SCTE35 in their MPEG-2 TS, and they did some work on constraining to enable actually the devices, what Yasser shown in the initial slide, to do the call to the ad server to do the ad replacement at the player. So that's like a broadcast broadband kind of scenario where the TV signal comes over broadcast, and the custom replacement is over broadband. And then there's DVB dash, so that's actually where the initial fight, I think, came from. But yeah, DVB dash also needed to adopt the SCTE35 signal that Yasser presented. So that's why they had some questions, which I will come to later in the presentation. And then there is part 3, where we actually made similar to the part 1 to really specify how ad slots can be signaled. And as in the OTT space, you know that server-side ad insertion is also quite popular, so it covers both the player and the server-side ad insertion, basically with the same signaling. So yeah, there was a whole list of topics that was discussed. You know, I'm not going to do all the details, but maybe given that I yesterday also gave a talk about the encoder synchronization, or the REAP, is that one topic was how to enable global timing, especially when you have multiple periods. So one idea is to actually use a common anchor for all the media timing, but you can also use that for the events. So in the Dash 4th edition, there was an attribute added to the event stream to have presentation time offset, and that basically allows you to also have a global timeline for the event, so that can be used. Then there were some other topics that were under discussion. Some questions regarding repeating SCOTI 35, how to update the MPD, how to map fields from the SCOTI 35 to the Dash event. So one thing I like to mention is that the timing of the splicing, what Yasser just showed, in Dash really comes from the event time. So that was something that was clarified as well. And then there were some specific use cases that were difficult to do in OTT, which was like the early return for sports, for example, when you want to return earlier, and then also the insertion use case for VOD, which traditionally in normal broadcast is not present. So some of the solutions are described here for the event signaling. So it indeed includes using a common time scale to have this frame accurate splicing that was discussed and documented. Yeah, also the carriage in the event itself. There were just some question of how to do it and how also to do the closing of the ad. That these are things that are all mentioned in the papers. So yeah, that clarified a lot of stuff for DVB, but also you know, we tried to put some of it into practice. So we actually used the signaling that SET and the DVB shared provide with the splice insert and the event to enable basically splitting of periods. So this is basically a simple version of a DAI ad proxy, but you basically take a single period in. It can be a live stream. So there's a link here to the live stream, and then we implemented basically a cloud function in Python with LXML that just enables to split the period, and it was actually working for live. So we actually got that working. So that was sort of implementing the single period to multi-period Dash workflow. And then we also have some more test streams available. So we integrated this signaling with several server-side ad insertion providers. So this is also available on our demo webpage if you want to check it out, or if you want to do some interop. So it includes some of the major DAI platform that actually support the SCOTI 35 single period based input. Then another topic that was touched upon was the ISO-BMFF and CMAF carriage. So this is a little bit a work on the side. It's basically an alternative way to carry SCOTI 35 in ISO file format. So when you don't have an MPD, for example, or you want to store it in a separate track in the cloud, or you want to ingest it upstream. So basically we work together with some of the file format experts, and there is a new metadata track format, which is basically in a sort of WebVTT and MP4 style, where you basically for each sample has a start time and an end time, but each sample contains all the currently active or relevant event data, so that you don't get these causality issues that you miss an in-band event, which is sometimes the case in Dash. So here's an example of that. So the idea is basically very similar to WebVTT and MP4. So each time the active set of events changes, there is a sample boundary. And then each sample contains either an event message empty box, which is similar to the WebVTT empty queue. And then it contains all the event message instance boxes that then can carry the SCOTI 35 payload. So actually there in the paper, there's actually a link to a sample implementation that allows you to create some examples and some test files. And also some of the, in last year's session, I think also Attempt presented some of their implementation of this. So it's actually a technology that's also already implemented in the industry. So we also set up a demo with the stream where we basically push the event track or the time metadata track from a separate process, and then we use FFmpeg in another process to create a media track to create a demo stream. So this is the same demo stream that I previously have shown. So that's our basically two things that I wanted to share together with Yasser of the joint work with DVB and SET to make the signaling of SCOTI 35 in the OTT workflow a bit more robust. And this includes constraints to SCOTI 35 itself, carriage in the MPD, but also some innovation in carrying in the file format itself. Yeah, and there is more, but we refer to the paper or maybe to the questions if you want to ask. Thank you.